On October 15, 2011, Philadelphia police were called to a crime scene so horrific it would forever change the blue-collar community of Longshore Avenue. The stench, overpowering and unbearable, filled the air, emanating from the basement of an apartment. But it wasn't the smell that first grabbed the attention of Hugo Gazlavli, the landlord. No, it was something far more unsettling: the constant, frantic barking of dogs in a building where pets were strictly forbidden. Gazlavli knocked on the apartment door, and Linda Weston answered. When he asked about the dogs, she denied it, flatly, but his suspicion only deepened. With quiet insistence, he convinced her to let him survey the premises. The living quarters gave up no clues. Until he reached a locked basement door, his heart pounded, but he broke through the chains that barred entry, and when his flashlight flickered on, what it revealed was a scene so horrific, so unimaginable, it could have been ripped from the most macabre of tales. Amid the overpowering stench, which nearly made him vomit, two small dogs barked frantically from inside, their desperate cries echoing through the damp darkness. But it wasn't just the dogs that terrified Gazlavli. No, what he saw next would stay with him forever: human figures. Huddled together, shrouded beneath filthy blankets, lying on a makeshift wooden platform, a man and a woman, weak and broken, clung to each other in the gloom, while two more men were trapped in the darkness, one confined in a filthy sleeping bag. The other chained like a medieval prisoner, his stomach churned, his heart raced, horrified, and driven by an overwhelming sense of urgency. Gazlavli did the only thing he could: he called the police. The investigation that followed would reveal a decade-long saga of unimaginable captivity and abuse, all orchestrated by Linda Weston and her accomplices, from this den of despair, which would come to be known as the Philly House of Horrors. This is one of the cruelest cases I have ever covered.
It just makes absolutely no sense.
Have either of you all seen a case like this before?
No.
Never.
It's shocking, appalling, and in so many ways incomprehensible. And to make matters worse, there are a staggering number of victims. A warning now: this story is not easy to hear. It's a rough one.
Did you ever think you'd get out?
The other guy was going to die there. She hit me with a pistol, like a gun pistol.
All this time later, the scars remain.
She hit me with a bat. She messed my ear up right here.
Tamara Breeden's body carries reminders of 10 years in captivity.
I kept on praying to Jesus, praying to God, so hope I get back home with my family.
In some parts of this story, there's not much visual reference, so I've done my best to give you a clear representation. But before we dive into today's case, I just want to remind you to like the video and subscribe if you're new. Your support helps me a lot. Thank you. It does not endorse or condone the criminal actions described within. Born into a harsh and unforgiving environment on October 26, 1959, Linda Weston's early life was shaped by hardship and constant turbulence. Linda would later recount a childhood overshadowed by abuse that would mirror the heinous acts she would one day carry out herself. She was abused by her mother, Alice Weston, beaten mercilessly. Along with her siblings, Linda was even forced into solicitation at a young age. A life so filled with pain, Linda's education was cut short. She only made it to the 4th grade. The passing of her mother in the 1970s threw Linda and her 12 siblings into chaos. Still in their formative years, in the aftermath of this tragedy, the siblings were torn apart, some finding refuge with their grandmother, while Linda and a few others remained under the care of an elder sister. Amidst this familial upheaval, Linda contended with mental health struggles, battling with both depression and schizophrenia. Linda's tyranny over her siblings began swiftly. Her brother's testimony revealed a chilling pattern of abuse. She manipulated her brothers and sisters into incestuous acts for the sake of childbirth. Linda told them that they needed to have babies so she could claim more child benefit checks. The siblings who were not being intimate at that time had to watch as the others were. She even threatened to put her youngest brother into the oven if they did not comply. Her reign was ruthless, with regular beatings and using substances to subdue them as and when she saw fit. She forced her siblings into violence against one another and sadistic punishments like consuming cockroaches for minor transgressions. As the years went on, Linda Weston's siblings slowly left the home that had been a stage for such unspeakable terror. Yet the shadow of fear Linda had cast over them was so deep, so all-encompassing, that none dared speak of the torment they had endured. This silence, though not their burden to bear, allowed Linda's reign of terror to continue unchecked. Linda's abuse didn't only scar her siblings, but also her own daughter, Jean McIntosh. Jean endured the same horrors Linda had suffered as a child, but tragically, she followed in her mother's footsteps, adopting her malevolent behaviors. The year 1981 would mark a chilling new chapter in the family's dark history. Linda's sister, Venus, became involved with a man named Bernardo Ramos and fell pregnant, but when questions arose about the paternity of Venus' child, Ramos found himself the next victim of Linda's savage wrath. What followed was a vicious beating delivered with a hammer. Before he was locked in a wardrobe, abandoned with no food, no water, Linda's brother witnessed this brutal assault, recalling the haunting sounds of Ramos' desperate struggles, his cries for help in secret acts of compassion. The brother attempted to sneak Ramos some food, but these efforts only led to more cruelty. Linda, cold and merciless, broke every single one of Ramos' toes with a hammer. Not long after, Ramos succumbed to malnutrition, dying in the confines of that wardrobe to cover their tracks. Linda and Venus transported his lifeless body to an abandoned house, but their efforts to hide the evidence were in vain. The body was soon discovered by police. The investigation that followed led to their arrests, but justice seemed to falter. With Linda receiving a paltry 8-year sentence for her horrific crimes, serving only 4.5 years, shocking for a crime of such unimaginable cruelty. Upon her release, Linda saw an opportunity in the chaos surrounding her family. When her sister, Vicky, faced the possibility of losing custody of her 10-year-old daughter, Beatrice, sensing a financial gain, Linda accompanied Vicky to court on July 19, 2002, and there, she convinced the court that Beatrice would be safe under her care. In a swift and careless decision, the court awarded custody to Linda without so much as inspecting her home or digging into her deeply troubling past. This oversight would prove catastrophic, considering Linda's violent history, including abuse toward her siblings, and a criminal record that included murder. The Department of Human Services workers, during their visits, noted the home as secure and stable, marking Beatrice's situation with her aunt as favorable. But there was more. At this time, Linda had a new partner, Gregory Thomas, living in the home with her, and despite the addition of new adults, no criminal background checks were done on any of them. In April 2003, full custody of Beatrice was officially granted to Linda, and not long after, Linda crossed paths with Eddie Wright, a man who saw himself as a street preacher known as Reverend Dead, and there was a third man in the picture, Nicholas Woodward. Linda was involved with all three men, but behind these personal relationships was something far darker. Under Linda's leadership, her daughter and these three men began a sinister plot to exploit mentally disabled individuals. It seemed as if Linda had been building toward this moment her whole life. She preyed on the most vulnerable, targeting individuals with mental disabilities, all for the sole purpose of stealing their social security benefits. She trapped her victims with a series of false promises, offering jobs as babysitters, the hope of romantic relationships, and the simple but powerful lure of companionship.
If you were a man, she'd be your girlfriend. If you were a woman, she'd be your girlfriend. If you needed a mother, she'd be your mother.
On June 26, 2005, the group's first victim was Tamara Breeden, a 29-year-old woman with autism. who had the mental capacity of a much younger person. She couldn't care for herself, and she lacked the ability to judge character. Tamara was quickly ensnared in Linda Weston's web of exploitation. Unable to independently manage her daily needs, Linda approached Tamara with a seemingly kind offer, a place to stay, in exchange for babysitting services. Tamara's partner, Edwin Santabria, also mentally and physically disabled, joined her in the Weston household. Linda seized control of their social security and disability benefits, tightening her grip on their lives. Then Linda turned on them. Her boyfriend, Gregory, was instructed to lock every door in the house, transforming rooms into prison cells. Tamara and Edwin were confined to the basement, a place only accessible by Linda, the sole person with the key. They were given only a bucket for their waste, and nothing else. Linda's niece, Beatrice, was locked in a cupboard under the stairs, in the flat above where Linda's daughter, Jean, lived. Beatrice was taken out only to be beaten, a daily ritual. She was hit with bats, iron pipes, fists, she was bitten, and cigarettes were put out on her body, leaving permanent scars. Her face was a map of the cruelty she had endured. Beatrice was also never allowed to go to school. Instead, on the rare occasion she was allowed out of her cupboard, to go down into the basement, to clean the bucket used by Tamara and Edwin. The perpetrators, living comfortably on their stolen funds, enjoyed food and luxuries, while their captives were sustained on a meager diet of beans, laced with depressants, and cheap ramen noodles, designed to keep them quiet, to keep them compliant. But when times grew harder, their cruelty grew worse, forcing the victims to eat their own bodily waste, and the waste of others. Their next victim was Maxine Lee, a woman with learning disabilities, and once again, Linda manipulated her into a relationship. Maxine began staying over at the house, but it wasn't long before she was confined to the basement. She was beaten regularly by all the men in the house, and even by some of the other victims who were forced to beat her, while the other captives were forced to watch, helpless. Just like Beatrice, Maxine was hit with baseball bats, iron pipes, and anything else they could get their hands on. Greg also forced himself on Maxine regularly, and before long, she fell pregnant. I can only assume Linda adopted the baby for profit, and the child was taken upstairs to live with her. With all this abuse going on, one would think that at least one neighbor would have noticed, and they did. Neighbors in West Palm Beach, living near the home occupied by Linda Weston and her accomplices, described the conditions as downright abhorrent. They spoke of constant sounds of distress, cries for help, and pleas from a woman's voice, refusing to comply. One neighbor, Veronica, initially dismissed the sounds, assuming they were just misbehaving children. But then, Veronica had several conversations with Gregory Thomas, who would seek her out only when Linda wasn't around, expressing a desire to reconnect with his family. In a chilling conversation, he revealed that only Linda and her children were allowed to have mobile phones. Veronica also witnessed Gregory's cruel treatment of the mentally disabled adults living in the home. One day, she saw him physically assault one of the victims, throwing him violently to the floor. Veronica tried to interact with one of the disabled women, but was met with silence. She asked Gregory why the woman wouldn't speak, and he coldly replied, "The captives are forbidden from speaking to anyone." This chilling testimony only further exposed the control and isolation Linda had imposed on her victims. Donna Spadia, a woman with significant mental disabilities and estranged from any support system, became an easy target for Linda's manipulative schemes. And she was the next to be trapped in the House of Horrors. Exploiting Donna's vulnerability, Linda quickly took control of her disability allowance. When Linda realized Donna wasn't even registered for state benefits, she cunningly escorted her to the benefits center, pretending to assist her in applying for entitlements. But instead, Linda claimed the benefits for herself.
She lied every month to the Social Security Administration as to what she was using the money for.
Donna received the same horrific treatment as the others, kept isolated in a small laundry room, starved, beaten, and humiliated. It fell to another captive, Maxine, to care for Donna's basic needs, as she could no longer dress herself or maintain any sense of hygiene. Tragically, Donna passed away alone in that laundry room on June 26, 2005, but Linda, unfazed by another death within her house, quickly orchestrated a cover-up, instructing the other captives to move Donna's body to a bedroom, where she staged a scene with empty pill bottles. Trying to make it look like a suicide, when the officers were eventually alerted, they believed her story, thinking that Donna had taken her own life. And just like that, Linda had gotten away with murder, and sadly, this was most likely not the first time. During this time, in an effort to make extra income after Donna's death, both Tamara and Beatrice, now 18, were forced to solicit themselves in a caravan parked outside the back of the house. Eventually, Tamara became pregnant, but tragically, the baby was stillborn. She didn't stop there though, and soon became pregnant again, giving birth to a girl. Linda took the baby in, naming her Little Elm. She was raised by Maxine, kept in a cupboard in the attic, but the cruelty didn't stop with the child. Maxine was subjected to a beating so severe, she actually fell through the floor. She was given no medical treatment, no food, and no water to recover, and in 2008, she passed away. Once again, Linda staged a scene to avoid suspicion of her death. Then came Derwin McElmere, a 41-year-old man with cerebral palsy and mental disabilities. The last victim Linda ensnared before her capture. While shopping, Linda noticed his solitary existence and saw an ideal target. She crafted a cunning plan, returning to the store repeatedly, each time accompanied by Tamara, when they encountered Derwin again. Linda had Tamara feign romantic interest, giving him her mobile number, setting the trap. When he called, Linda lured him to the house, where he was brutally attacked, beaten mercilessly by the men in the house, quickly becoming another victim. But this time, something was different. Derwin had not given up. His will to live was stronger than Linda anticipated. He managed to escape, running down the road, but his freedom would be short-lived. He was chased down by Nicholas Woodward, who held a gun to Derwin's head, threatening to kill him if he didn't return. When Derwin was brought back, Linda's fury knew no bounds. She set the dog on him, letting it bite him all over his body, even tearing off the lower part of his ear. After that, he was forced to live in a tiny compartment under the stairs, starving, given nothing but a bottle to urinate in when he defecated. He was forced to eat it, sometimes even drinking his own urine. Finally, Derwin was taken down to the basement, where he was chained to the boiler, a prisoner, until he was rescued. Philadelphia Police Commissioner Charles Ramsey said, "I have never seen a victim whose injuries were more severe than what I saw last night with this young woman." The woman he was referring to was Beatrice. When she was rescued, she was found alone, locked in a cupboard. Her head was wrapped in cloth, but her body and face were covered in scars, fresh wounds. She had used rags to try to bandage herself. But it was clear the damage was far beyond her ability to heal. She had recently been beaten, her 2 front teeth knocked out, she had been burned, and her bones had healed incorrectly. This was depravity on a level that few can comprehend.
Beatrice Weston has a body covered in scars from being cut and burned. The dark spot on her forehead, she says, is from being pistol whipped, and fuchsia lipstick hides more pain.
She bust my teeth out with the bat. Before the landlord called the cops, I was in that closet for 2 weeks.
Beatrice says her hell began at 10 when Linda was given custody of her. Her lawyers contend this was city negligence, since Linda had served time for starving a man to death in 1981.
She put me in basements, locked me in closets, attics, freezing, like all these places was freezing.
Every day, Beatrice begged God for relief, but she says after 2 other hostages allegedly died from the abuse, her own fate seems certain.
I thought I was going to die.
The 4 victims were finally liberated from the House of Horrors. The landlord described their living conditions as nightmarish, a lightless room, with a filthy floor, and a bucket as a toilet. He said one man was even chained to a boiler pipe. They were tired, beaten down, thirsty, and starving. They didn't even know what world they were living in, along with the adults who were freed. A staggering 6 young people, either born there or brought in, were also rescued, but there was no sign of little Elle. Cheryl McGill, a former neighbor of Linda's, shared a heartbreaking story with a Philadelphia newspaper. In 2008, she had taken care of a young girl, whom Linda had claimed was her own. Cheryl became deeply attached to the child, and the girl would cry every time Linda came to take her back. Moved by the child's distress, Cheryl offered to adopt her, and Linda initially agreed, but before the adoption could be finalized, Linda's daughter, Jean, intervened, removing the child from Cheryl's care, and no one ever saw little Elle again. This case is horrific on so many levels, but little Elle's fate may be the most tragic of them all. As many as 50 people are suspected to have been victims in this case. Judging by the identification found at the House of Horrors, truly shocking. Tamara Breeden was one of the captives rescued in 2011, and once free, she found strength she never knew she had. She was able to attend school again and care for her 3 children, 2 of whom had been born in captivity. Tamara said, "I feel nice, I feel happy." She continued, "I kept praying to Jesus, praying to God, that I could get back home to my family. I thought I was going to die there. When I saw the other 2 die, I thought for sure it would be my turn next. She kept hitting me with bars, sticks. I see my scars every day. But I say to God, I'm still beautiful, and I'm still alive." Beatrice Weston, Linda's niece, also survived, and after everything she had endured, she began to heal, undergoing therapy, making new friends, and planning for a career. She said, "I want to be a nurse. I want to be happy." Linda Weston and her accomplices defrauded an estimated $202,000 before justice finally caught up with them. On September 9, 2015, Weston faced the consequences of her horrific actions, pleading guilty to a series of federal charges, including kidnapping, racketeering, kidnapping resulting in death, trafficking, and theft of government funds. But Linda tried to claim that it was because of her upbringing, that she wasn't fully responsible for her actions. But the judge wasn't having it. He sentenced her to life in prison, where she would serve her time at the Federal Medical Center, Carswell, in Texas. The court also mandated that Weston pay over $270,000 in restitution. Her daughter, Jean McIntosh, was sentenced to 40 years, while Gregory Thomas received 27 years. As for Nicholas Woodward and Eddie Wright, their sentences were similar, though I'm not certain of the exact terms. Under Linda Weston's leadership, this group ran their criminal operations across multiple states, Florida, Pennsylvania, Texas, and Virginia, from 2001 to 2011, constantly moving to evade law enforcement detection. The victims, though they could have escaped many times, were kept trapped by Linda's violence, both physical and mental. Fear is a powerful force, and over time, they likely lost the will to escape. After enduring such unimaginable trauma, none of these survivors will ever be the same, but they are doing everything they can to adjust and reclaim their lives. In the end, Linda Weston's reign of terror finally came to a close. But the scars she left behind, both physical and emotional, will stay with her victims forever. Some are slowly finding their way back to normality, but for many the trauma runs deep, and the pain caused by Weston's cruelty will never be forgotten. As for Linda, her life behind bars is just the beginning of the justice that should have been served years ago, the House of Horrors, as it became known. will forever stand as a grim reminder of the depths of human depravity and the unimaginable strength it takes to survive such horrors. But the victims, they continue to move forward, their stories now a powerful testament to resilience and the human spirit's incredible capacity to survive even the worst of circumstances. The victims, though they could have escaped many times, were trapped by Linda's violence. Both physical and mental fear, as we all know, is an incredibly controlling force, and over time they must have lost the will to escape after enduring such unimaginable trauma. None of them will ever be the same, but they are doing everything they can to adjust, to rebuild their lives, and find hope once again.